Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. In this video I want to show you a little macro that I created that adds a like a templated header to a worksheet. And so let me show you real quick. I'll just click on this button on my automation tab. Boom, there's a new header here that I've formatted. I've got the column widths set to a custom format. I've got some custom borders here. And then I've got these custom field names. And so this is a situation where I might want to use sort of a template to recreate this over and over again for maybe a new customer, new account number. And I've set it, or I've actually created a macro to do this instead of like saving a physical worksheet as a blank template. It's much easier. I can do this and save this actually to my personal workbook that makes this macro available in any worksheet that I open. And so it's pretty cool. So I wanted to show you how to do that, or at least partly how I did that. I'll show you kind of one component of it. And actually, specifically, I'm going to show you how to create an array and use an array that we will fill with string values that pass, and then pass those string values to the actual worksheet here using a for next loop. So we'll get to that in a minute. Before that, I did want to remind you to click on the subscribe button and then actually click on that bell icon, and that way you'll get notifications when I add more videos to the channel. And then also be sure and like the video, and then leave a comment below if you have any questions or if this helped you out. I would certainly love to hear from you. So let's get started creating this macro. So the first thing I want to do is I'm just going to open up a new workbook. Let's go to the developer tab. You can go to the Visual Basic editor by clicking on Visual Basic in the code group. Alternatively, we can use the keyboard shortcut Alt F11, and every time I press that, it makes the VB editor visible, invisible, visible, invisible. I'm just hitting Alt F11. So it's a cool keyboard shortcut to know that reduces the number of mouse clicks that you make. So in this case, I don't have any macros yet in this new workbook. Now I can see both of the current workbooks that are open if I collapse that for book one, which is the new workbook. We also have this personal workbook, which is for those of you that don't know, it's a hidden workbook that actually opens every time you open Excel. Now you can change the view to have that visible when you open Excel, but for the most part, and certainly out of the box when you install Excel, it's hidden, so you can't see it, but you can actually see it in your VBA project Explorer here. So anyway, back to our new workbook. What I need to do is click on Microsoft Excel objects to select that, right click, go down and find insert, and when you hover over that, this little arrow shows module or user form module, class module. We want to click on module, and when we do, it gives us a blank slate here, so to speak, in our editor. So what we need to do is we're going to go ahead and name our macro. We've got to start it with the sub keyword for short for sub procedure. And then I'm just going to call this new account header. And then when I hit enter, it'll automatically add this in subline, and it adds these double parentheses. That's not really of any concern of ours in this particular case, but just so you know, if you're new to VBA, this is where you would put any arguments, much like if you're familiar with formulas and functions in the worksheet. You have the arguments and parameters that you supply to your formulas and functions in order to make those work. In this particular case, we don't need that. So first thing I want to do is leave a comment that as just kind of a best practice to just remind users if they're working in this macro at any point in the future what this actually does. So I'm just going to say, instead of making it like a formal sentence, I'm just going to say creates header section for new account sheet. And so if you don't know the way you create a comment, which is a line in your macro that's not an executable line of code, I don't know what I just did there, you start with a single quote, and then everything behind that on that same line will automatically turn to a green font, and that just indicates it's a comment, and when you run the code, Excel just ignores that line. So anyway, so it's kind of just a best practice. I just wanted to throw that out there. So I'm going to create some variables here that we're going to use, and the first one is going to be for the array of text values. If you remember earlier in the video where I showed you that header box, it had all these values like account number, created on, account, company, or company name, so on. I'm going to create an array that contains all of those string values. Now, the reason I'm doing that, it's like a more efficient way of doing the same thing as I could actually create a variable for each one of those text values. I could create a string value for each one of those, and then create a macro that passed every one of those to the particular cell that I wanted it to. However, that creates a bunch of lines of code that you really don't need. And I'm about to show you how you can avoid creating, I think we have like 6 values. So you don't have to create 6 variables. You just need to create one array variable, and then we'll use a for next loop to pass those values into the worksheet. All right, so let me just shut up and get going here. So I'm just going to dimension or declare field array as variant. And so variant is a data type I use a lot for arrays, and it can be either numeric or text. So that's why I use it that way. In this particular case, I could in fact use string, knowing that these are string values, but I'm just going to go this route. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to the values. And in order to do that, I just take that variable name equals array, open my parentheses, and then start typing the values that I need. So the first one's going to be account number. I'm going to put a colon on there, and then comma. And notice that, remember, it's a string value, so it's got to be in double quotes. Then comma gets me to the next element of the array, and that's going to be created date, and then another comma, and that's going to be company name, contact name, another comma for the next element. It's going to be contact email, then contact quotes, double quotes, contact phone. So I'm going to close the parentheses now. That's the last element of my array. So let's take a quick look at this. So account number, created date, company name, contact email, contact phone. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 string values within one variable, as opposed to 6 different variables for each string value. Now, the other thing about an array is that there is a numeric value for each one of these elements. And you know how we counted these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 elements. However, by default, arrays are counted starting at an index number of 0. It's very important when you're working with arrays to remember that. So this would actually be referred to as 0, and then this would be 1, this would be 2, this would be 3, 4, and 5. But that's still 6 elements because 0 is one of the elements. Now, you can actually change that to what's called option base 1. So by default, it's option base 0. And we can actually type in a line of code. It's called, or you just type option base 1. And when you do that, you get this little line here automatically. And so what that does is it now sets this to start at a value of 1. I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to throw that out there so you knew. I'm not going to do that in this particular case because I think it's going to be easier for me to kind of show you and kind of drive that home, that default option base 0, because that's what you'll see most often. And so the next thing we need to do, so we have our variable declared, we have our variable set. It's our array of string values that will make up that header or the field values for our header. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, we've got to figure out a way, how do we pass these values to the actual worksheet? And that's where this for next loop comes in. So if you've never used a for next loop, it's actually pretty simple. However, let me back up one bit. I actually jumped the gun here. I actually need to declare another variable. And so it's going to be dim my count. Okay, and it's going to be as integer. Okay, and so my count is going to actually refer to these elements within our array. That's going to come in handy here in our for next loop. And so now let me get started with that. So for my count equals, what I want to do is I want to set this for loop to cycle through every element in this array. And the way that we do that in an array is we use these keywords L bound and U bound that symbolize, or they stand for lower bound and upper bound. The lower bound of this array in any array, unless you change it to option base 1, is 0. The upper bound in our case is 5 because there's 6 elements, but starting at 0 gets us to the maximum element of 5. So I'm going to, for my count, L bound, and this is the way you write this, L bound field array to U bound field. I am not typing very well today. So, okay, so what this basically means, let me go ahead and wrap this up. Let me put this next. I'm just going to do next my count. Okay, so this is your this is a for next loop. So you've got you begin with the for, and it's basically saying for my count, which is our variable, from L bound field array, which we know is 0, to U bound or upper bound of field array, which we know is 5. Do whatever the code is in between here and in between the for and the next. And we're about to write that code, but we haven't done it yet. I just want you to understand what my count, you're saying from my count from 0 to 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, do whatever's in between for and next. And so what we're basically doing is allowing us to repeat some line of code or lines of code for every element, the count of elements in this array, instead of writing multiple lines of code that basically are repeating the same process. And so what I want to do is I want to tell Excel, okay, take each one of these string values in this field array and pass it into the worksheet. But I've got to tell it which cell to pass it into. So what I could do is I could go range B2, right? I want to start it at B2. And then I could do range B2 dot value, which is saying I want the value of cell B2 to be the first element in this array, field array. And in parentheses, I could just put 0. But if I did that, I wouldn't need this for loop or this for next loop, because I'm basically telling it by static range what to do. I would basically just need to repeat this process, B2, B3, B4, B5, and so on, and then just field array 0, field array 1, field array 2. But what that's going to do is create like 6 lines of code that basically repeat except for 1 or 2 elements. Well, there's a way to do this dynamically, so you just have one line of code and then you let the for next loop do the heavy lifting, do the real work. And the way that we do that, I'm just going to leave that line of code there. It's not permanent, but I'm just going to leave it there for the sake of comparison. Instead of using the range property, I'm going to use the cells property. So when I type cells, open the parentheses, it actually tells me in this tooltip that I have 2 arguments. I have row index and column index. All that is those are fancy names for row number and column number. So for B2, that's going to be, obviously it's going to be row 2, and then it's going to be column 2 because column B is the second column, right? We know column A is column 1. All right, so instead of range B2, it's now cells 2, comma 2, dot value, and then on the right side of the equals, I need this to be field array 0, right? Well, actually, I don't have to I don't have to put 0. So dynamically I can put my count because I know the first array, I'm sorry, not the first array, the first element of the array is index 0. So L bound or lower bound is 0. So it's the same thing. This is the static way to select field array element 0. This is the dynamic way, as we're going to go my count from lower bound, which is 0, to upper bound to 5. So every time we go through this loop, it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. However, if we don't fix it over here, we've got a static cell location, and that's the cell in column 2, row 2. How do we make this dynamic? Well, we do the same thing we did over here to make the actual field array element number dynamic. We use that my count variable, and it's going to be plus my count on the row index. So because we know that the first time through, lower bound field array is actually array element 0. So for the first time through, this isn't going to have any impact on this row index. That's still going to be 2 because my count is 0. However, the next time around, we want to put field array element 1, which is created date, on row 3. Well, if my count is 1, 2 plus 1 is 3, and so on. So you see how that works. So at this point, we've actually got this the way we want it. I can eliminate this line of code we were using for the sake of comparison. So instead of having like 6 lines of code, we just have these 3 lines of code right here. All right, so here's our macro. It doesn't look like much. I mean, it's not a lot of lines of code, but let me walk through this real quick. So I'm just going to F8 through these. I'm going to just press F8. So I'm going to step through each of these lines of code, get down to the for loop or for next loop. And so the first time I get through the line of code here that actually passes the element from the array to the cell that we've indicated that we want it to pass to, I'm going to press F8 again. You're going to see account number go in cell B2, just like we planned it. And then I'm going to F8 through again to go to the next line, and look how this is working out just as we planned it. Each successive row in the same column, based on the my count variable, is getting that value from the array passed to it. And now we're done. So let me just delete this real quick, and I'll show you. I showed you in steps. I want to show you just by running the macro itself, instead of stepping through each line. So I'll just hit this, and I can F5, or I can hit this play, and boom, it passes all those values into the worksheet from a macro, and you don't have to like create like a template or something and save this sheet somewhere and remember what folder you saved it to, so long as you save this to your personal workbook, which I won't do here just because the video's gotten a little bit long. But if you'd like, I'm going to continue this on and actually work on the formatting, and then eventually show you how to add that to your personal workbook so that you have that available at any time at your fingertips in a subsequent video. So thanks for watching. I hope this helped. Please, again, hit that subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment. If you got any questions, certainly post those as comments, and I'll do my best to get to those. Again, I certainly appreciate you watching. Have a great day. Thanks everybody for watching. Please take a minute to like and subscribe, and be sure to check us out at theaccidentalexcellist.com.